My name is Larry Fitzgerald. I'm going to be talking about fretting technique. This is not just, I have electric here, but it's acoustic, electric, arch top, mandolin, banjo, whatever instruments that you work on. Fretting has always been a passion of mine. When I first started, I started out when I was about 16 years old, and I started getting guitars when I live in New York. I used to grow up in Staten Island. And I lived very close to Mandolin Brothers, which was 2 blocks from where I lived, which I thought everybody had a Mandolin Brothers where they lived. And to my dismay, when I went to other places, I'm like, wow, these are small little shops with very little guitar. And Mandolin Brothers, if you've ever been there, it was one of the kind of meccas for string instrument people, because what happened was there was a place where you could go and you could walk in and get greeted and sit down, take off your belt, have a fun time, play your guitar, play a banjo, walk into a room of banjos and mandolins that were like nobody else. Probably Elderly is the only other place that I know of that would have something like that. So as a young kid, you know, I started out and just going in there, and they were so gracious and kind to me. Stan, a very close friend of mine, and someone I really, developed a great relationship as a young kid. I used to go in there and he'd let me play any guitar, Fretwork Martins, 59 Les Pauls, Strats, Tellys, everything that you could think of, I had access to. So that was a big deal to me. But I was always amazed at how every guitar played so differently. And each guitar that I touched, I kept, kind of incrementally judging myself. This one's good, this one's not so good, And I would go to different places and try to figure that out. And one of the things that led to me getting further into this was I bought a guitar at Manny's Music. I bought a Fender Stratocaster. And I just couldn't, I was playing a lot of blues as a kid, and I couldn't bend because it had a 7 1/4 inch radius, tiny little frets. And like hearing like Stevie Ray Vaughan and guys like that, I'm going, man, how do they bend like that? I can't get this to happen. So I brought the guitar home. My best friend looked at me and he says, wow, he was like, wow, you have a Fender, And I was like, yeah, but it sucks. And I didn't mean that in the way that the guitar was any problem. I meant it in the way that the guitar was just not doing what I wanted to do. It didn't perform the way I wanted to do. So I started to look and research fretting. Well, my first venture into this led me to Stuart McDonald and Dan. And Dan, instantly opened up the doors to me because I was able to get a video on how to fret. And not only that, I would read his book. I would go to Don Teeter's book, Hideo Kamimoto, and a bunch of other guys. There was very little information that were out at the time, and you had to actually go and really search for it. So then I kept going into Mandolin Brothers and saying, hey, can you guys teach me? And believe me, I had to knock on a lot of doors. Can you have a job for me today? Nothing like that. So I ended up going up to 48th Street in New York City, and there was just Music Row. It was all the stores, and I went into every store, and then finally I went to Rudy's, and I stopped in and I played one of John Sur's custom guitars. And I was like, oh, that's very different than anything else I've ever touched. And I went in there and I introduced myself to him, and he was very gracious. And I was like, why do you guitarists play so amazing? And he kind of chuckled and laughed. He goes, well, because I fret them. And I didn't know what he meant by that at first. And he goes, no, I mean, whatever guitar we do, we refret. And I was like, that's interesting. I was like, how does that happen? And he had a couple of demonstrations, and he had one of the workstations that Stuart McDonald had, which was a tension table. And the table flips into playing position. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, or the new version that Stu Mac offers right now is phenomenal because it's really lightweight and you can carry it around. That's my preferred method, really, to fret any guitar. Fretting a guitar to tension is like nothing else, in my opinion. You could fret a guitar totally like this and be successful. I mean, it's really not a matter of having any particular special tool. It's more about your method of going about it. Evaluating your neck is really critical. It doesn't matter if it's an acoustic or electric guitar. It does matter if you know how to tell what's going to happen when you put tension on that instrument. The tension on the instrument completely changes it. I know a lot of manufacturers will actually level their fingerboards, and when they put it down, they'll actually press in the frets, which is easy to do on a new fingerboard that's been slotted and never had a fret in it. You could do that. Refretting is another story. I generally refret all my guitars, and I use glue all the time. I use different glues. I use acrylic glues, I use Titebond, I've been experimenting with glues, especially because where I am, guys don't want to wait, so they want it fairly quick. They want to bring a guitar in and like go get coffee, and they'll be back, and they're going to try to get the guitar finished up. So, so you have to be fast in the sense of getting it done, the job done. But in no way should you ever compromise your time and effort, to me, for a customer, for the quality of your work. Your quality of your work should stand on its own. And as you get to do many guitars and many fret jobs, you will get really good at it, okay? It's not rocket science. I mean, I have a pluck machine in my shop, and I still prefer to use this as my method of leveling and polishing and doing that. The reason being is I like to feel it. I also like to feel, you can press frets in. I still use a hammer, I still use a couple of hammers. The reason being, because I like to feel when the fret goes in, especially on a refret. A refret's very different to me than a build. A build usually has a nice, fresh, clean slot, and you can definitely press your fret, and you can feel them now. But I still like to feel the fret going into the board. I kind of hear it, and kind of get a sense for that. I'll pass a couple things around too, so you can see. These are some of the interesting files that I've gotten over the years. One is the first file I ever got from John Suhr. I got this one from Fitzgerald, who's also a master craftsman. So I'll pass some of these around just so you can see the different kind of files I use. And I get the same result no matter what file I use. It's just a matter of your technique and how you go about fretting guitars. I'll also pass it around a couple of the necks. One of the things you want to do is make sure you evaluate the neck. Like it here, I don't know if you guys are familiar, these are American standard necks. They have a biflex truss rod. And if you fret it the normal way, you're going to fret this 3 or 4 times before you get it to be satisfactory. The only way to do this is you have to take out the inlay and inject some caulking or something in there so you don't get this rattle. This inherent rattle, which really bothers me a lot. I'll pass a couple of these around just so you can tap on here. You hear the Mighty Mite neck. Not so bad. Who knows that one? I got that one actually from Evan. So one of the things, guys, I want to tell you is there's nothing better than coming to ASIA and Symposium. Be connected, be involved. I know Evan's written a lot of stuff recently about just get involved, and it really is true. We're in a great community. We love guitars, right? We're passionate about guitars. We love this. They're over. My wife says they're over your head while you're sleeping. And it's like, yeah, they kind of are sometimes. And also, I would never be where I am today without guys like Dan, guys like John Suhr, Fitzgerald. I used to work with Peter for a period of time at Manlin Brothers. Steve Arenshield, who's Steve? Steve's over there. Steve is actually one of my first teachers, actually. Steve and Joe Concoli were my first teachers. I went to the National Guitar Summer Workshop, and because of those gentlemen, I'm here being able to present to you after 32 years of fretting instruments. But I love to give the accolades to the people because they're the mentors. Those are the people who taught me how to do it. And I would take a little piece from each of them. I know Dan and I had a class at the National Guitar Summer Workshop. One time we did a master class, and we did a variety of topics. Bridge reblues, and just, it was a wealth of knowledge. You can't even say how much that Dan has been an integral part of this whole community. Guys like Mike Kuntz, Mark Weininger, Leroy Aiello, these guys are really talented. I'm very fortunate. I got to work next to some of these guys. Our friend Charlie the Valley, who just passed away, was an incredible craftsman, repairman, and just overall human being, so it was a great thing to have. But when you go to fret your guitars, you have to take a good look at the neck. You want to make sure you can flex the neck. You want to make sure that you can get a good read about what that neck's doing. Adjust the truss rod, take it out of the guitar, usually lubricate it, put it back in. Some of them don't come out, by the way. I had a music craft neck recently that has a traditional looking nut at the end like an old Fender, and I'm like trying to adjust it, and I didn't realize it was a double expanded rod, and I said, boy oh boy, I said, glad I didn't twist that thing off to take it out because it would have snapped the rod. And then you have other necks. This is a customer's neck of mine. I think we refretted this about 5 times over the years. It's probably from 1980 or so. It's a Schecter neck. I'll pass it around so you guys can see it, but this is a neck that gets to the point that if we're at the point, if we refret this again, I'm going to have to actually take the tang and cut the tang down to fit the board so it doesn't go into the maple. But if you can see, it's a well-worn neck. Pass it around. it's a well-worn neck, and you can see your method and technique of fretting that is going to be different, you know, for, let's say, doing that than a brand new neck. Your fingerboard radius, the type of fret you use, the height, the type of material, nickel, silver, stainless steel, Evo wire, they're all going to make a difference on how you approach that guitar. Also, how tight the fit of the fret goes in. I like to have a snug fit in the board. I don't like my frets to move. Majority of the reason why I started gluing, in fact, when I was going up to Rudy's when I was a kid, one of the things I first learned was how John would you know, fret the guitar, and then he would actually put a clamp on it, or coil. Now, Don Teeter's book had talked about gluing in frets years ago, and I said, oh yeah, I remember reading about that, but I never saw it really in this way. So what happened was I had a friend of mine make me this set of polycarbonate. Now, this is really, really old, a new version that I'm working with now. But this worked for me really well. This is probably 30 years old that I've been using this. But everyone knows, because I always bring my backpack with me to work every day, and I have a choice set of tools in this, and they go everywhere with me. I probably, you know, even go on vacation with my wife yells at me. But the method for it is, when I finally get all the frets into the guitar, I'll put this on, and I will clamp it. And it's kind of spring-loaded by a piece of rubber here, so it allows it to hit the center and then press on the ends. The reason we use polycarbonate is because it doesn't crack, it doesn't change form, it stays the same. There's a lot of glue residue you can see on this, and I'll pass that around so you can see that. But that's my favorite tool. I mean, essentially, a hammer, some of the files, a tool. I have an old Mac Donnelly fret plane that I got years ago, and this is, you know, this is basically the majority of the method I use. Obviously, with newer tools that Stu Mac has, you know, these bars are phenomenal because they're really straight. They give you a good feel when you're going across, and you know, they really do allow you to, you know, to get a good job. You want to get your work straight. You have to secure your work down. To me, the tension table is the best way because I can completely secure it. Obviously, you can see this is like my dummy. My first Fernandez Strat that I think I bought. I used that body. And the reason I do that is because you can see, as I'm standing, sometimes you slip around. I don't want to do that to a customer's, you know, 1958 Stratocaster, you know. I mean, he wants a relic, but not that much more. You know. Naturally, he wants that done. So, why do we fret guitars? You know, why do we fret, and how much time does it take? Why? You know, what's the reason for us to do that? Number one is to play better. You know, usually a guitar, if I'm refretting, it's because they've either worn out their frets, their fingerboard is warped. Most of the time they need to be planed. Because I've had and you guys who've been in the business know, you have brand new guitars from really highly qualified manufacturers or builders, and the fretwork is really subpar. And it's not because the look of the fret. Anybody can make a fret look real good and shiny, but if it's not level, if the board isn't right, you know, you're going to have problems and issues, and there's no level and polish fleck machine, anything is going to correct that. You need to go back to the basics and say, okay, we need to pull the frets and level the board. A lot of my customers go into shock because they go, what? I just bought this, you know? I bought this custom guitar, it was 10 grand. And I'm like, boy, oh boy, for 10 grand, you gotta imagine how annoyed that customer is about playing that guitar. It's buzzing all over the place, you know? So those, how many guys here are builders? Raise your hand if you those. A lot of builders. How many guys are repairing? Okay, a lot of that. How many guys are brand new, starting out? Okay, great. I'm glad you guys, welcome you guys. So fretting is really the icing on the cake for me. And you build this beautiful box or an electric guitar, acoustic guitar, arch top guitar. You know, we got some of the best people in the world here, like Linda Manzer and John Monteleone, and you know, you've got some really incredible builders, you know, Tom Rebecki. There's some really high-end builders. You can get a wealth of information from these people. And they're going to tell you, if you play their guitars, they play really well. And the reason is because they do spend the time that it takes to get the fretwork right. Okay? It's, to me, the icing on the cake. I'm a guitar player first. That's how I started as a kid. I played guitar, played in bands. I was really interested in making a guitar play really good. Because for me, I was searching as a kid all the time, going to stores, played hundreds of guitars. And some of them played better than others. While I was at Rudy's for a period of time, I remember there was an Ovation guitar that played horrifically. It was unbelievably just buzzing all over the place. And I saw John put that Ovation, which you know with the bowl in the back, not easy to secure down. And he was able to get it on the tension table, and pulled the frets, leveled that board straight, and fretted it. And when I got to play the guitar with a set of 12s, I think the action was 3 64ths on the bass side and 2 on the treble side. And there was no buzzing. As hard as I hit that thing, there was no buzzing. And I was like, how is that possible? So it is possible on some guitars to get action that low, especially, you know, I noticed that in different areas of the country, people play with different expectations. Part of it might be because of the repair guys or the people that are in that field and how they do their work. You know, you have to have a really acute sensitivity to detail when it comes to playing. If you don't play guitar, learn to play it. I'm not saying to be, you know, a virtuoso, but learn how to play guitar as much as you can. Why? Because that translates into how does my customer want that guitar to play. Some guys don't want, you know, we have different expectations of what the guitar should be. I have guys who are 6'4" who like the skinniest neck with the smallest frets and 8s. And I'm looking at him like, what, that guy? And then I got this guy, he's 5 foot, and he plays a baseball bat neck, jumbo frets, 13s. And I'm like, that just doesn't, right? That doesn't make sense in a way. But everybody's different, and their personal passion for the guitar, though, is still the same. Okay, this is a passion we have. We love guitars, right? Everybody loves guitars. Everybody has a favorite guitar. The thing that drove me was, how can I make it better? I mean, I just always constantly, how can I strive to make my guitar better? How can I make it play better? This stuff is kind of what led me there, and this is pretty much it. I think you probably noticed too. My bench is always, this is clean for me. My bench looks like, when I was at Rudy's, Mandel Brothers, Pete would tell you, they would come over and flip and say, yeah, this looks like Yucca Flats after the bomb. And it was because I had piles of stuff, but I would be able to find what I needed, you know. Having a clean space is really important too. You don't want to damage someone's guitars or do anything like that. And also, if you guys have any particular questions, you know, please ask. You know, whether you're doing acoustic guitars or electric guitars, some of the method is the same. But I don't approach every single guitar and do the method the exact same way. I actually look at each guitar. I flex the neck, I grab it, I try to flex it, I try to figure out what's going on and get a read on the neck. I get a bunch of straight edges. I have a couple. I have the not straight edge from Stu Mack, which is awesome to read the board, because, you know, what happens is most people look at a guitar and they go like this and they look on both sides. And that gives you a good idea of what's going on from the left to the right side of the fingerboard. What's going on in the middle? How do you see that with your eye? I don't know about you, but I can't see that with my eye. As much as I tried, I get a good idea, but if it's buzzing in a certain area, I could tell. You can get the fret rocker and things like that and go across the board. That helps you to, you know, figure out where you have high spots. And then the other side of it is, when do you tell a customer when you get their instrument, you know, you need a fret drop? And you know, like, you get that look in their face because they know it's like, yeah, you need the timing belt and the water pump. What? You know, I only paid $400 for this guitar. I understand, but the fret job is, the labor is the labor. I don't know about how many guys here. How many guys take more than 3 hours to do a fret job? More than 8 hours? Sometimes 20? Depends on the guitar. Depends how bad the guitar is, especially, I would say, when it comes to refretting. Acoustical instruments will have a little bit more of a challenge because there's usually more of a flip at the end of the fingerboard. I also can't take it off like a bolt-on. You know, the Leo Fender kind of design is brilliant because I can also take the neck off and work on it in this position and then put it back on. But you know, if you have a Martin neck, a Taylor, or arch top, an old L5, those guitars are pretty much, unless you're doing a neck reset on it, and even if you are, they're stable. You have to work with the whole guitar. The things that come into play is how are you going to approach clamping that guitar down, and what happens to the guitar when you start to level the fingerboard. Okay, that neck starts to flex. If I take the guitar, I put it on something, and you can see it. I'm not putting a lot of pressure either. So what happens? Okay, is when I'm leveling that fingerboard, I'm creating myself my own hollow and a flip at the end of the board naturally. So this is why I started to use the table. I started out probably the first method I used it was using the table, and I haven't been able to stop using it. You know, I probably use it on 95% of all my fret jobs that I do, especially if I'm building my own guitar, because I want it to be as good as I can get it. I can't see a method. So far, there's no fast way. Not much faster way to do fretwork. you know, it's just one of those jobs. You have to take the time, you have to take the energy to, you know, to do the job where you feel like you're going to give the customer a really satisfactory quality job on there. And the only way to do that is take your time and get it right. And you have to be able to do that by using the proper tools, setting up your area, and you know, just going for level on the board and getting that neck really straight. So I'll pass these around too. This is the Stu Mack notch file, and this is Starrett level that I've been using for years. And you know, that's my favorite method to use for doing some frets and stuff in guitars. The other thing I would talk about is fret wire and what type of fret wire you'd like to use. I buy a lot of my fret wire from Stu Mack. I also get some from Jezcar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jezcar. I've used Dunlop. I've used just about all different fret wire. It doesn't matter to me what brand of fret wire, in a sense that I can make that work. But it's very important that, you know, you get the fret wire to fit the guitar. Obviously, if you get them in lengths like this, sometimes they come in rolls. One of the things you have to make sure is that when you get some fret wire, that you're going to clean it off. Does anyone know why you need to clean off the fret wire? The reason is because it's really dirty and greasy. Okay, I use regular minimal spirits. But if I take the fret wire, we're running through, let's see. That's all the grease that's on there. So if you're going to put this into a fingerboard, you're going to contend with that grease and let it dry after a little while. Otherwise, you're going to have problems with it popping out on you. The glue won't adhere to it as well as it should. So that's one of the things, you know, I tell people to do when they're doing their fret work. Any questions? Anybody have any questions? Anything in particular you want to talk about?
Yeah. What is this tension table you're speaking of? How does that work?
Okay. The original table, I remember Stu Mack was originally selling it too at the time, many years ago. And we got one both at Menlo Road and Rudy's was the first place I saw it.
The Luthier's Workstation.
Luthier's Workstation is what it was actually called. And the new version we call a what now? What's the new version now that you have?
The early one.
Early one. All right. So this was a table, a physical table. I couldn't get the computer to work, so I would show you, but I had pictures of mine. But it would actually, it's a tension table, and it would actually be able to, you know, tilt into playing position. So I get the guitar, and it tilts into playing position like this. And what that allows me to do is, I have the guitar strung to pitch. I have a notch over here for this type of, you know, guitar, where I can get to the truss rod. I take the guitar and I put it into playing position. Okay, strung fully to pitch, you want that to be done. I have already, usually at this stage, the frets are pulled. Okay, and now I'm going to adjust the neck dead straight, or as straight as I can get it, because there's some imperfections. That's why, let's say I'm doing a neck that's a little warped or has some issues. So I will get the neck into playing position. I will adjust the neck, use the straight edge. I have a light behind me so I can see how straight that neck is. And by doing that, that allows me to get the neck as accurate as I can in playing position. Why? Because if you take a guitar and you take it like this and go like this, it does change. And you're like, oh yeah, but it's minimal. It's enough. It's enough to make the difference. You know, you don't. And the other thing is, you don't play guitar in this position. You don't play a guitar in this position. You play a guitar in this position. And that really does matter. And that's the one thing I noticed. Like, you know, Dan has had experience. I don't know if anybody else has experience with the Plek machine. Anybody here? Okay. I had mine. I probably had mine for about 10 years, and the Plek machine holds the guitar into this position. And you know, it's a great tool. It's just like anything else. The machine is just like a tool. It's only as good as the operator who's using it. Okay, and you have to be really sensitive to what you're doing with it. And it's a machine. It doesn't. The only thing is, it doesn't have the sensitivity that a human being has. It does what you tell it to do, and it cuts the way you want. It's a machine. The human hand and the eye are your best tools. They're your greatest tools. Trust in yourself. Trust that you can do an amazing job. I've had guys come in and go, oh, could you scan my guitar? And he'd like cringe. I'd put it in the machine and we look at the scan. We're like, this is phenomenal. You did a great job. And then they come walking out and they're like victorious. You know, they get to walk out encouraged. And I love that. The one thing it does do is it really does a great job of scanning, giving you data and information. It does a great job for that. It's a great tool. It's used for some things. It's not used for all things. I'm old school. I kind of like this method of just doing it on a table, you know, when I can. And my job, I work in a 15 by 13 room with the plec machine and other workers, so it's really confined space. At home I have much bigger space actually, which is nice. Put my music on and no distractions. I also have, you know, at Sam Ash's where I work during the day, and I have my own Fitzgerald guitars, you know, later on at night and weekends. That's where I work. I work pretty much 7 days a week. Fortunately, I love what I do. But the whole idea is that, you know, you're going to be working in an area or shop. Fretwork is one of those things you want to try to get done when you're not distracted. I do most of my fretwork early in the morning. That's when I'm best at. I don't do it late at night. You have to find a time when it's good for you to do it, right? Because you have to focus and really, you know, you don't want distractions and come back and go, where was I trying to find that high spot? And, you know, that'll throw you really off, I think. So you have to be really conscious of the time that you feel that's the best time for you to do that kind of work, or any work. Whatever guitar work you do, if it's your best time of the day to work on it, just tell people, leave me alone, don't distract me, let me get into this. You know. Any other questions?
T-Bone Walker played it on it.
What's that?
T-Bone Walker played it this way.
That's right. T-Bone Walker was one of the few guys. Yeah, he could play it strung up, and it was like in this position. So, Jeff Healy, yeah, he could do that. So there is a few guys that will do it. So you might have a different method for their fretting on the guitar. You know, so that would definitely change it around. Also, when it comes to, let's say, vintage guitars, we'll talk a little bit about vintage guitars. There's this whole thing about vintage guitars, and I had gone through this with both Stan at Mandel Brothers and with Rudy, because they were the two in New York that were high-end collectors. So it was Matt Newmanoff and a bunch of other great shops. I mean, we grew up in New York. You have a lot of great music stores. So I'm sure you guys do too in whatever area you're in. But I was never able to see the volume of guitars. I mean, you know, I walked into Mandel Brothers. I thought it was normal to have a rack of D'Angelico, DeQuistos, Three-Wall Martins, 50s, Fenders, and Gibsons. That was just normal, everyday stuff. Very different today. I'm sure if anybody has a shop and they're real busy, you will see some vintage guitars, but you probably don't see as much of them. Okay? And when somebody brings it in, you have to be really careful and cautious about what you're going to do to that guitar. I have a feeling that if a guitar, it's a musical instrument first. Okay, that's what we call it, that's what it is. When it was originally made, it probably was never thought of, this is a 59 Les Paul that's going to be worth $400,000. Nobody really thought of that when they probably made that guitar. If they did, they probably would have kept making it. Because it makes sense. If something's really, why is it that when everything's really good, they stop doing it? Okay, we're good. We made the best. That's it. I always laughed at that. I always thought that was kind of interesting. I had, John McEnroe had a 59 Les Paul that I worked on when I was at Rudy's. And it's a lefty 59. It's one of 3 made. So when it came time to work on a guitar like that, you had to step back and just kind of gaze at the guitar first a little bit and say, okay, what are we going to do to make this, you know, as good as we can? At that point, we were able to consider this guitar doesn't need a full refret. We can do a level and polish and get it right. To me, that was the right thing to do on a guitar like that because of the fact that I want to totally keep the integrity of the guitar and its value. It does take away some of the value. Anytime you alter a guitar, you change a tuning peg, you change, you know, any little minuscule thing will change the value of a vintage guitar in the vintage guitar market for people who what they consider blue chip, you know, pieces, meaning they're dead, either dead mint or they're all original. There's a different side to me. I'm a guitar player. I don't play it. So if it's, even if it is a 59 Les Paul and it's unplayable, it's just not a playable guitar for me. I want to make it a playable guitar. So you have to have that conversation either with the store owner if you're working or the customer to make sure that the guitar is something that they want to do any kind of work to. You know, I always want to get permission. I even get it in writing usually at this stage of the game because you want to be sure that you're kind of covering all the bases, that you're not devaluing someone's instrument. I personally don't think a fret job that's really good devalues an instrument. That's my personal opinion. I think it actually enhances it because now it's playable. You put it back into the market and make it playable. If you were restoring an old, you know, old car, an old Corvette or something like that, you're not going to go roll down the street with the original tires. It's not going to happen. They're dry rotted. They're going to fall off as you go down the road. So a guitar to me and the frets are just as important. But my first approach to it would be definitely looking into the guitar and seeing if I can actually do a level and polish to make it playable. That would be my first route. If not, then we can go to the next step and ask people. And there were plenty of times, you know, there were some vintage guitars where the person wanted to play it. So their concern was more about that. How much value does it take away? That's really kind of a tough situation because not everybody has the same opinion about that. So you just have to make sure that if you do a vintage guitar, you try to recreate what was original. I try to get the same kind of frets. I tried, if it wasn't glued in, I try not to glue them in. But if I can, if the person lets me do what I think is right for the guitar, then I'm going to glue them in, and I'm going to do the method that I think that will make it the best playing guitar for a customer. Because that's ultimately what I want to do, is make a great playing guitar for people. The different kinds of fret wire that you use, large fret wire, small fret wire, this is also really important too, because it will definitely affect and enhance a guitar some people just don't like. Like I said, I had that original Fender Strat from Manny's, and the tiny little Fender fret wire with the 7 1/4 inch radius did not let me bend. I couldn't do Albert King bends on that guitar. So I took it home and I pulled all the frets out. My best friend was like, "You ruined your guitar." And I was like, "No, I'm going to make it better." And I leveled the board, and I put the frets in, I refinished the board, and I put jumbo frets and let him play it for about a week, and he came right back in, "Okay, do mine," And that was a good feeling because, then he had confidence and trust in what I was doing, It's amazing to see what, people do to their guitars and the fretwork. I mean, I'm sure anybody who's done lots of fretwork will actually look, and I do, I look critically at a guitar and its fretwork right away. It's one of the most important parts of the guitar. I mean, everything else can be great, but the fretwork is falling short. You made this beautiful piece of furniture then, It has to be really, really good. And you have to make sure that the quality of the fretwork that you do is on a high level. So, you need to pick up the books. You need to look at the videos. Dan has, I think, 3 series of videos out. There are plenty of other places. Ask lots of questions, too, to guys. What kind of frets they use, what kind of glue they use, what kind of method. And really take a critical look at the way someone does their fretwork. And not from a thing that, oh, mine's better than yours. It's really not a matter of that. It's really a matter of, how good do you want the guitar to play for someone? What is it about that guitar that generates and makes them really interested in playing? I know that I'm very passionate about a guitar. When it plays great, I want to play it. I'll get lost in playing guitar for hours. That's what you want. That's the effect. Passionately, you want them to pick up that guitar and go, "Man, this is great." And there is nothing better than getting a phone call and saying, "Hey, you know what? That guitar you just did for me, man, it plays better than it ever did." That was what I was looking for. Sometimes you're looking for it to play better than it was original. And you can do that if you take the time to level the fingerboard first, okay? Making sure the slots are nice and clean. And again, you could, do different methods. I've actually for years used a drummer like this. This is the old one, Dan. I was telling you I can't find these anymore. But a method like this, I've turned to a couple of new ones recently, and it's still falling apart. But I still am totally comfortable with taking a regular saw, and going through the slots because I know the measurement of this and my actual fret wire will actually be nice and snug. The other methods, obviously, old guitars, pre-war Martins and things like that, they used to use bar frets. So anybody here have done bar fret wire and stuff like that, right? Fun stuff, right? Challenging, unbelievable. I don't know about you, but all I can tell you is it usually takes me 3 or 4 times to fret a guitar the right way with bar fret wire. I think TJ Thompson's probably the best that I know of that does that kind of work, and I learned a lot from TJ over the years. Joe Concoli also does really, really good stuff like that. But those are really challenging guitars. If you should get a pre-war guitar like that requires that, it's probably worth it to seek, if you've never done it before on a vintage piece, seek someone else's expertise either for questions or maybe even directly send it to them. Don't be afraid, if a job seems to be a little bit over your head, to send it with people, to other people that are really qualified. American Standard Necks, how many guys have refretted these? Right? These are interesting, aren't they? I fretted a guitar for a friend of mine and I got it as straight as it could be. He literally wore the frets off the guitar. And I refretted it with maybe like 6100 fret wire, so it was kind of jumbo, we like that. And we set it up and the guitar actually buzzed more than when I actually got it. And I couldn't understand why. So we leveled it and polished the frets. Then we put it into the plecking sheet. We did that. Still buzzing. I took the frets out. I was so frustrated. I took the frets out. I re-leveled the board again on the table, and I was able to put the strings on, and I got it maybe 10% better. And it was still buzzing though. And the customer just didn't like it. did the same thing, leveled it again, put it in the pleck again, did it over. There's rare times that you're gonna have that guitar where you're going, I've already spent 4 days fretting this one guitar. I'm losing a lot of money. And it really does happen occasionally. But I have to say, that's one scenario. So there is an inherent thing. I didn't know about the biflex rod at that time as far as how it would react. There's definitely an inherent issue to me with maple necks mostly too, more than rosary.
They work the board different.
Yeah, they work the board differently for sure. And it also, the rod, I don't know if you ever noticed, when you adjust these, don't give it back right away, because it's still moving. It's going to move for about another, I don't know, maybe about 10 hours before it really settles in.
And they
So,
move the board in a different area.
Right.
They move the board in a different area. It's not a smooth transition.
yeah, it's not at all. So there are some guitars that are just a little more difficult. So when people approach me and they go, I got a fret job, I'm like, great, what do you got? Get an American Standard. Like, you know, I know this guy, Evan, he's really, he'll explain to you how he's going to do his method on this for you. That was great.
If he'll answer the phone.
He'll answer the phone. Yeah. First call him 50 times. Or send him a nice email. But, you know, there are guitars that sometimes are going to be problematic for you. Yeah.
I have another question. The fact that you said that let it set for a while before you send it home. What is it that the guitar I made, everything was nice, no buzzing, put it in the case, let a bunch of guys play it, put it in the case for a couple of days, and I took it out to play it, and it had a buzz.
Right.
And what causes that? I mean, does the tension in the neck gradually?
Sure. The tension of some necks will gradually move. Here's also a really important thing to consider. What time of the year are you fretting the guitar? People don't think of that. Oh yeah, it matters a lot. But we live here in the Northeast, so we have 4 seasons. And 4 seasons do what? It changes the wood, it changes the neck, it changes the movement of that neck, especially wood that is flat sawn, that, you know, or flamed wood. I don't know, any guys refret flamed necks? Usually they're the most notorious to twist. I had a beautiful, gorgeous Charvel that had like 7-8 flames on it. My friend spent a lot of money at the custom shop. And he brought that neck to me, and the first day we had it, we set it up and played amazing. 3 weeks later, that neck was like this. It was twisted all over the place. And he only played with like a set of 10s on it, but it was really, really twisted. You know, that was just one of those necks, and I said, the only way to do this is if we try to refret this. But I said, even beforehand, I told him, we may refret this, you may play good, and it may twist again in another couple of months. You know? So I have to let somebody know that ahead of time. So, yes, your guitar neck might be moving. So that's another thing you have to consider, where the placement of where that rod is going to be. You have to consider, okay, in the summertime, that neck's going to want to swell and go up. Okay, in the wintertime, it's going to shrink. So I have to have that movement of that rod so that I have room. I like to have it somewhere where I have enough room to torque. If anything, I want to be backed off because the tension of the strings is naturally going to make me torque it as soon as I put the tension on there. So that's an important consideration when you're fretting the guitar, because of the fact that, you know, once you put that string tension on, and you do need to know how much, you know, I tell guys, challenge yourself. Go find out how many pounds a set of 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s. It's different. You know, it's not the same. So that neck is going to pull differently with different kinds of strings. And there were other strings, like I remember, was it the Nickel Rocker, GHS? They make a string where you look at the gauge, but the tension's much stiffer. Just like Fender, I think it's either Fender Super Bullets. Actually, they have a couple of sets of strings that they may be 10s, but they're less tension. So those are the factors to consider. You know, your strings, the tension.
Silly question, Tom.
Yeah.
When you're all finished, you want that neck level under tension?
Ultimately, yeah, that's going to be your best scenario. The reason being is because on electric instruments, it's usually like a Stratocaster, a Gibson, or something like that. It's going to be pretty much a great straight job when you're done. There's also the situation where you want to leave maybe a little bit of fall weight, 1 or 2 thousandths, a little fall weight. But I can also do that in the leveling when I'm doing it. But you have to realize an instrument is always anchored in some way, whether it's acoustic or electric. It's bolted here. So what's the likelihood over time this is going to kick up on it? Because you got tension from here and down here, and it's pulling in this area. Well, acoustic guitars, right, arch tops, nylon strings, they are anchored right in the center portion of where the neck joint is. They're doing the same thing. They usually have it more. If you ever notice, if you look, I mean, I love scanning guitars on the Pleck machine just for the scanning purpose to see what they're doing. And almost every guitar has, electric guitars have a flip at the end, especially basses. I don't know if you guys work a lot on basses, but Fender basses go like this, and then they just jump like crazy. And that's because of the amount of tension. Yeah, it's an enormous amount of tension down there holding that instrument on. And Fender, we call it the Fender flip. It's like it just comes and it just, you know, it's a ramp going up. And it's really hard because some of them that have the veneers, you almost can't get, there's not an easy way to level and do that board to get it really straight. Sometimes you're limited. You're really limited to what you can do on an instrument like that. And that's why sometimes be cautious about that. Really evaluate it. Don't be afraid of saying to the guy, I think it's time that you get a new neck maybe, you know, for this instrument. Because you don't want to spend all that time on a vintage instrument working on it and then suddenly realizing you're not satisfying that customer. Why is that? Well, I didn't account for how much material. And then I see guys, they'll take down like that neck I gave you. This is still doable, this neck, but it's getting close that if I had a level, fortunately it's fairly straight, but if I had to level this much more, you know, we're going to be cutting through the rosewood into, I've seen necks where I've actually seen necks where guys have cut it so much, there is no rosewood left on the top, which I'm like, wow. And that's on a vintage instrument, you know, so you have to be, you know, really careful about thinking about which guitars you're going to take on. You know, evaluate your repair when you're doing it. It's really important. I think Dan and Evan would agree with me, or anybody who's repaired. Evaluating the guitar before you quote someone it's going to be your, number one, is your best way to make money because you're going to evaluate, this is going to take me 7 or 8 hours, or it's going to take me 4 hours. You know, yeah.
One of the things I've always struggled with is dealing with people whose instruments are now, but may someday be vintage.
Okay.
And I mean, I can't tell you the number of really nice Les Pauls in the 70s and 80s that I put Floyd Roses on.
Mm-hmm.
And I always was hesitant to do that, and I always told people, you know, this is going to devalue your guitar in the long run.
Right.
But that's sort of a strange balancing act to try to figure that out. And I was wondering how you handle that with people when they do have a nice quality guitar and they want to do something fairly radical like that. What do you tell them?
Right. Well, you know, if somebody has that concern that their guitar is going to be vintage, I think any guitar that's purchased today would be
nobody knows that.
Well, no, but I think the way the vintage market is too right now, and this is a speculation, just personal opinion, I think that a guitar that's brand new, a brand new Fender, for example, or a Martin, brand new today, for it to be vintage, the probably time frame is going to be well over 50 years, probably, in consideration. Just from seeing, I've been in the vintage market since the early 80s.
So in other words, let your kids or grandkids get disappointed when they find out you destroyed the
the idea is that you're working on it to preserve the instrument. You know, you're doing it with integrity. You're trying to figure out how can I preserve this instrument as best I can, you know, and keep the quality of it playing. You want to keep it going. If the guitar is not playable, what's the point of it? You know, if a guitar is not playable, you know, there's really little point in, you know, continuing with the guitar. It's going to sit in a closet somewhere, and then someone else is going to have to figure out how to fix it at some point. You know, so it's an interesting question that you bring up. And you know, vintage guitars across the board. I mean, we all have a love affair usually with very old, antique, vintage. I mean, people relic guitars today. You know,
reminds us of our youth.
Right, it does, and people are drawn to that. If you notice the market, I would say the vintage market is mostly guys that are in their 50s to 75 right now. Those are the guys that I know that are clients of mine that have a plethora. You know, I used to do a lot of guitars for Steve Miller. I mean, guys who have, I have one guy, I think one of my customers has about 380 guitars. Him alone, almost, you know, he brings enough guitars for me almost weekly that I can sustain almost just on him, which is a nice thing. But the fact is that people have guitars and they love them and they want to keep them in good shape. You know, so and they value it too, so they do. They keep them up and they maintain them.
Yeah, that's keeping them up is one thing. Radically changing them is the
right. And for some people, if they've never had a fret job, this is you know, brain surgery going on. It's really, you know, for us, it's not so crazy. But at the same time, you know, for those of you who have never fretted, definitely get yourself a couple of, you know, cheap necks, cheap guitars, something like that. Experiment and practice. Yeah.
There's an analogy in the vintage furniture business that it's been refinished, it's ruined.
Right.
But if it hadn't been refinished,
right,
it would have been firewood.
Right. It probably would have warped to the point, that it's not usable. you know, the violin field, it's normal. They take violins apart all the time. I mean, Stradivarius has been taken, and I've worked on one Stradivarius, and it was really incredible. And it came apart like it was so easy. I was just able to heat up the high glue and with a spatula, and it came apart. And I'm like, this is exactly how it should be made. You know, the violin field is really different. They're totally used to fingerboards coming off and putting them back on and putting some new glue on. You know, it doesn't seem to devalue the violin. A Stradivarius is still a Stradivarius value-wise.
Should we, as builders, be thinking along those lines?
Sure. Well, I mean, yeah, if you're going to get a really high quality. For example, I remember Pat Metheny came in with one of Linda Manzer's baritone guitars, and it had some issues and problems that we had to fix on it. And the first thing I did was pick up the phone and I called Linda and I said, hey Linda, you know, I've got one of your instruments here, it's Pat's, and I want to confide in you on what you think we should do or approach. This is what I'm thinking. And she was totally, yeah, you think that's what we need to do, then let's do that. But I always felt the need to contact the builder if I could. First of all, because I even said, you want me to send it back to you? Because I know, like with my custom guitars, I've had a couple of guys do that where they go, hey, you know, the guy's actually won the frets on this, do you want to have it sent back? And I knew the guy who was a great, you know, luthier and guitar player. I said, no, if you're competent in doing it, then do it. But if the customer felt so, they might want to send it back to the original maker. And that's another thing too. If you are a guitar maker and your guitar's out there, you should be able to fix your own guitars. I don't understand why guys would be like, no, I already sold it, I'm off and gone. That's I don't get that ethically. I don't get that.
I've been leaning towards high glue for that reason as much as I can.
Right. Yeah, well, I've been talking with Dan and a couple other guys. I actually have been getting further into high glue lately, including doing fretwork, joints. I just like the way it sounds, the way it works.
It sounds better.
It to me sounds, there is to me no better thing. Type-on is a great glue. However, it's a little bit, and you know, if you glue a headstock, fine, it's going to hold. But there is some elasticity, and it does affect transmission of sound.
But it is reversible.
But it is reversible, yeah. Yeah, Peter.
First off, I just want to thank you, Larry. You're giving us so much great information.
Thanks.
Thank you
thanks.
so much for
Trying.
joining us for us. Question: if you're refretting a maple neck guitar, Fender,
Right.
or something like that, polyurethane spray over it, and everything like that. When you refret it, do you spray it first before you put the frets in, or do you spray it after the
Okay,
frets?
yeah, good question. Over the years, most of the Fenders that I worked on were vintage maple necks, so they had nitro finish on them. Nowadays, you have a lot of polyester, polyurethane necks, and if you know, the second you start to work on them, they start to chip and they're really heavily coated. So it's really difficult. There are some necks where if the neck and the fingerboard is really, you know, really straight, if I put the straight edge and the not straight edge on there and it's really kind of straight, I will try to talk to the customer about, let's just remove the old frets carefully, clean out the slots and put a brand new fret. I will clamp it and glue it, and I'll try that. There are times, like 95% of the time, that works out great. That means I don't have to touch 1954 Strat, I don't have to touch the integrity of the rest of the neck because it's still pretty straight. And I can do a great level and polish and the guy's back up and running. To me, it's also preserving the integrity of the instrument, you know, for the guy, because he has the original wear. He doesn't want his original wear. I've been wearing that since 1954. He doesn't want to change that. So that's one method of being able to do that. But there are guys where I just like this, I flip at that end of the board or in the middle of the neck, you know, really refretting it completely, leveling, pull the frets, level the board. Yes, I have to take off that. That's where people who are experts at like antiquing, I don't know if you know a lot of guys, or they relic, you know, there are some guys in this business that, you know, in fact, Dan did do an article and a video at one point with antiquing and relicing, and I was always mesmerized by that because of the fact that that does look exactly like it was. So we try to authenticate a guitar to what it looked like or recreate it, and you can do that. But like on a newer neck, you know, something like this, if I were to refret this, I would pull the frets out, I would level the board down, take all the finish off, I would actually refinish the board. Okay, and then I would put my frets into it. And then if I really needed to make it look like a 70s and below era, if I needed to have that look of the lacquer going over the frets, then I would go over it again and then do the level and polish. But I don't prefer, I don't know about you guys, I don't like the way Fender made that build up so high on all the lacquer. It just gave me less room, it was really uncomfortable to play for me. So I never...
And a real pain in the ass to pull the frets from.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, yeah, if you take a 70s Fender with polyester and you start to pull those frets, I mean, it just chips all over the place. You're doing more fill. You're spending more time filling and just recreating what it looked like than you are actually almost the rest of the whole job. It takes a long time. And that's also something you have to consider. How much do you charge? Right? How many guys charge, let's say, $100 for a refret? Anybody? $200, $300, $400, $500, $600. There are guys I know charge $800 for fret jobs.
Some
Depending on what it
guitars,
is.
sure, $1,200 on some guitars.
It depends on the guitar. It depends on the guitar. Some guys, of course, look at you in shock and dismay when they say, what? But, you know, if you think about it, if you take a regular neck that's not so bad and you refret it, it will take you 6 or 8 hours. A guitar that's got
12 hours,
really a
12
lot of problems that you have to fill in, the guy's worn out the whole first position, the wood is almost gone, it's going to take you a lot more time. A bound fingerboard, you know, things like that. I have guys, I don't know if you guys do or not, whether you do a bound fingerboard like a Les Paul, if you just pull the frets and level it, take the nibs off. If you know what I'm talking about, you take the nibs off and then you put the fret and the fret comes right out to the end. Okay? I kind of prefer that because I have a more playing field, but I do have customers that do not want me to take the nibs out, and I have to try to level that fingerboard, not touching the nibs, and then hand fit each and every one. That's another $400. That's going to definitely cost another $400 for me to do that kind of job, because it's going to take me that much more time. Yeah, it does. It probably takes me twice or 3 times as long. Yeah.
On the maple necks, what do you do about the finger pits that are right there behind the frets?
Right,
I
like
mean, you're talking about
the worn spot.
Yes, I've seen them where it looks.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. I had a guy both with, I think we were, yeah, a customer of mine came in and reminded me. He had a bass, a Fender bass, like a 60s bass, and he brought it to Alex Music and Carlo Greco, who was another really great guy. He had passed recently, but I learned a lot from Carlo. He was next door to me at Rudy's. Worked for the Guild Factory, really talented craftsman, and one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. He had another guy that worked with him, and when he brought the instrument in, he wanted them to refret it, and he refretted it. And he thought because, you know, he was refretting it, he'd do the guy a favor. He'd fill in the areas, okay, where it was worn, and where his thumb rested had a huge scoop, and he filled that in. When he came to pick that instrument back up, he was like, oh my God, what'd you do to my instrument? He's like, plays great, right? He's like, no! It's like, because those spots that are worn, you have to make sure you ask them, is it okay to refill them? So rosewood is pretty easy to do, ebony is pretty easy to do, maple is a challenge, you know, to really fill. I've really never filled the spots on maple. I don't see a reason. Usually if I level it down, I'll try to level it to the point, but sometimes they're so deep that I don't want to just level the board down to that spot because you're taking off sometimes way too
What
much.
do you fill them with?
Well, if I'm using a rosewood or ebony board, I use rosewood or ebony dust if I can. I use that. I'll use
An epoxy?
acrylic glues, epoxies, depending on what works for me. Usually I mix it up and then I can get it. I try to make it also look good so that it looks as good as I can. Sometimes I'll actually take a piece out though and cut it and inlay it like a section. It almost looks better sometimes. Rosewood and ebony you can do that really well with. Maple is really difficult. You know, spruce, maple, yeah.
I went once to Groove Guitars and they were filling the divots in a rosewood fingerboard, and they actually took a knife and they scored down along the grain lines, and then filled that with dust and then put the glue in.
Yeah.
And it was just like invisible.
Yeah, rosewood's really great for that purpose. You can actually make a guitar look incredibly good doing that. You know, there's a good method for that.
That was Pasquale, by the way.
Pasquale. Yeah.
We did that on that guitar.
That's right. Yeah, Pasquale is an interesting repair guy. There's some great guys that we knew from another day, you know. But you know, when it comes down to it, just make sure that you make it a priority that whether you're repairing or building, that you make the fretwork. I mean, this is the last, right? This is the last hurrah at the end of the instrument. So it's got to sound good and play good. You know, get really good with your setup skills. As far as, you know, leveling and you know, doing a good level and polish, you know, practice that a lot. You know, a lot of guitars, if you have just even extra guitars around, you're not good at that. You want to be able to get really good at leveling and polishing. I'll run you through. Yeah.
Are there any particular materials that work better in an electric guitar or a classical guitar or a steel string acoustic guitar, that, or is it just a matter of personal preference? The player wants that type of fret as far as what it's made out of?
As far as the material for fret wire and stuff?
Is what it's made out of?
Yeah, because I know some people love Evo wire. I know some people are allergic to nickel. I have a couple of customers of mine that they can't play nickel strings, they can't use nickel frets. so they have to use stainless steel or Evo or something else.
And what is Evo?
Evo is a different type of material that they use. It's kind of a goldish looking color. It's a little hard. It's in between stainless steel and the regular nickel wire as far as probably its strength.
Can I
As
make
far
an
as how it's
observation? Could I make an observation?
Yeah,
about
sure.
Evo wire? I've been using pounds of Evo wire for the last 3 years, and what I've noticed is that if you refret a guitar for a guy who plays 4 or 5 hours a day, like a student at a university, for instance, if that kid has Palmar sweat, which is a high acid content sweat,
Right.
he will emulsify the Evo wire.
Right.
Okay, so essentially you'll melt the wire. So if you have, people who are really using the instrument intensively, it's best not to use Evo wire and just go with straight stainless steel.
Right. How many guys prefer or like stainless steel? Anybody?
I like it, but the only thing is, do you have separate tools for working with
Oh, yes,
stainless steel wire?
absolutely. To be honest with you, I actually have different sets of
Yeah.
files and tools.
Me too.
Cutters, for example, too. I got some fret cutters. This is a great tool when you're, cutting off the fret ends, but make sure they're good and new and sharp, because you actually do some damage when they're not. If they're dull and worn, just get another set, because you're going to save a lot of time in the repair work. Your tools being sharp and working out really well. I mean, I love looking at people's shops and their tools and what they have. A lot of times guys will come up to me and they'll show me some of their tools. I'm like, where'd you get that? I'm like, oh, my grandfather had this thing, and it was like, can you get me another one? And they're like, no, that's the only one that's around. But like a worn file, actually, I love worn files because sometimes they give you just the right cut when you're leveling and crowning. It's important to get yourself a good set of tools that work for you. You may get used to one tool and that's it, like the neck jig and a couple of the other tools that I use. I'm used to them, so they're really important to me to work with. But I do use different tools for stainless because they cut differently. I usually a little more aggressively, but then I go to a finer one. It's important to use that. Also, different materials. I'll give you a little bit of a run through when I do a level and polish after I've done, let's say, some of the frets. I've leveled the board out, I got the board exactly the way I want it. I'll usually come back either with a tool like this, with some sandpaper on it. If I'm leveling the frets, I'll start out with about 400 grit paper. And that's just to make sure that I've got all the frets nice and even. I still prefer, if you can, if you have a neck jig, leave the guitar in the neck jig and jig it back up, even after, I know it's a lot of work, but your fret leveling work will come out so much better than if you just, go ahead and just level. Because again, anytime you press on this, it's moving. What's supporting that? So you're essentially, even after the frets, you're putting a hollow into the frets. You need to make sure that neck is real firm and really, really solid. You'll get much better results. You'll be amazed. There are plenty of times that I've actually done a really good fret job, and I'm totally confident that this board is as straight as I can get it. I'll mark off the tops of the frets, usually using a Sharpie or something like that. I mark off the tops, and then I'll come back with either the Sumac, block, or I'll come back with anything that you really feel comfortable that's straight. It should be really true. And I'll come back and I'll level across the top of the frets, and I'll go one pass, and I've hit every single one of those frets. And I even sometimes mark it a second time just to be sure. So I may start up with 400, then I'll go to 600. And then from there, I start to crown the fret. So if I have a fret, okay, and it's new, I'm taking this material off here. Okay, so now I have a flat spot. When my string comes down, it wants to play right on the center of it. Okay, so I have to make sure that when the percussion is pressing down the string, it's playing off the center, not off to the sides, because then I have intonation problems. So that's why you want it. That's one of the main reasons why you want to level and crown some of these frets, and they have a nice fret where the string can touch it. Also, there's more issues with it vibrating and buzzing on a flatter fret surface than it is a crown board. So obviously, after you're done, okay, when I round this fret out, I come across here with the file and get it to the point where I have just a small little hollow. And you put the marker on the top. Most of you guys have seen it. You put the marker on the top of the frets, and you'll come across and you'll shape it and round it. Now they have tons of files that are already rounded for that shape and size fret wire. Those are fine. I personally use I personally use just three-corner file. That's what I've been, taught with when I started out, so I'm comfortable with that. But you definitely want to be able to round this off and then sand this down, so that you're creating, now you're creating that exact round fret that you originally had, so that when that string comes off, it's playing off the tip. Two main reasons: it does look better, it feels a lot better, but also you're going to play with less buzzing issues. You have less surface area for it to be buzzing. Okay, so that's really an important thing. When you go to the point of actually, let's say, polishing up the fret, I'll do about 400, 600, sometimes even 800, and that's pretty good for that. Then it's like, well, how far do you go with polishing out the fret after you've reshaped and crowned it? I usually still use something to back it up with. I usually have 3M squeegees, and I cut these down. I wrap the sandpaper around it, and I'll come in, and I'll come across here, and I'll go over the whole surface area of the fret. I'll start out maybe 320, 400, 600, 800. I'll go up there, and then I'll finalize it. If you don't have a buffing wheel at home, steel wool will be good for the final end result. The other thing that I will use is micro mesh. If you guys are familiar with micro mesh, okay? Micro mesh is really good, and I use that sometimes on a backing pad when I'm finally done, and that's really for polishing purposes only, but they go up to 12,000 in the micro mesh. You get the little box, the micro mesh kit, and I can come across, wrap around here, and just come across the frets, and that allows me to get a really high polish finish if you don't have a buffing wheel. Buffing wheel still to me is your best method to get a really high polish, like a factory polished fret job. I mean, still to this day, I'm amazed when I get a Surrey guitar or something like that, or a Paul Reed Smith sometimes. The fretwork is just really phenomenal. But if you notice the difference between, let's say, a really great guitar and not so great guitar. I mean, how many guys have had a guitar? It's a Martin, Gibson, whatever manufacturer, really high end, and it does not play well. And the first thing you have to look at is you have to look at the guitar itself, and see where the issues are. The majority of times it's the fingerboard, it's not necessarily the frets. So you have to be really conscious about making sure that you read the neck. Because if you look at a guitar, well, these frets look fine, and it's buzzing all over the place. Chances are it's the neck that's the issue, And who was talking about different fingerboards and stuff like that, like phenolic boards and things like that. Somebody's asking me questions, right? You're talking like Richlite?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody refret Richlite fingerboards? Right?
Yep.
Fun too, right?
Well, if you've been working on Steinbergers for years, it kind of reminds me of
graphite and
that.
stuff. Yeah, I've done that too. I've worked on Steinbergers for a long time.
Yeah.
Make sure you put a mask on.
Yeah.
Because this stuff, also even when you are sanding, I can't stress highly enough, wear a mask. That dust that you guys are going to be breathing in for 30 years, that's going to take its toll.
It's actually pretty good stuff.
It's good. Some of it's good. I like rosewood. Rosewood's fine. I seem to be able to inhale rosewood and I have no real issues with
The
that.
frets go in easy to this chords. It's
Right.
great.
And sometimes, sometimes people didn't. I remember the first time somebody brought me a guitar and it was all shattered, and it was a phenolic board, and they didn't know it. They thought it was just a piece of wood. So they were having a real tough time both getting frets in there in the slots and getting it to work right. But you have to make sure also when you get the fret and you figure out the size that you're going to put in there, that it seats really well. And then you have to decide, are you going to glue the fret in or just press it in or hammer it in? How many guys glue their frets in? I glue my frets in. How many guys just hammer? There's strictly no glue used.
As much as possible.
As much as possible. Okay. Why do you do that?
I don't want glue in there because I'm going to have to go back in and refret this instrument in the years to come, and I don't want to pull out the glue. I don't necessarily think was needed to begin with.
Right. And that's kind of old school way. That's the way it was traditionally done because most frets, like I said, a brand new fingerboard, very easy to put frets in, right?
Yeah.
A refret is another story because now you got frets popping out. And they can't have frets popping out or heavy. How many times have you seen somebody's guitar and they had somebody refret it, and they're like, "Wow, I just had it refretted and spent $200." I'm like, looks like $200. And the frets are still not seated. The fret ends are sharp. They're not seated. I could catch my shirt on the side of it.
Is there a possible tonal issue with filling voids so you get a better sound?
Okay, so there's a little contrary to what he's talking about. He's doing a very old method where you actually press or hammer in the fret, and if it seats really well, which I'm sure he does a great job at doing that. I've done plenty of Martin style guitars or kit guitars or anything like that where I can get the fret to sit, and I don't need any glue technically. However, gluing in the fret allows a couple of things to assure you. And this is where it comes in. What kind of glue do you use? And why would you use it? Okay? It does fill in the hollowness or the void. If a guitar's a refret and somebody has already gouged out those slots really deep, you're going to kind of need, sometimes I've actually completely refilled the fingerboards.
You get better vibrations.
Well, there is a transmission difference, there's no doubt. There's, with the method, the older style method, when you either press them into a board or hammer them in with no glue, there is a chance, or people have told me they have certain dead notes or dead spots, or hollow. You know, hollowness kind of a sound, it would be a good description. But it does happen, I don't know if anybody's experienced that. Sometimes you have one fret popping up on an old Martin, you glue it down, you clamp it, you glue it down, and you're ready to go again, and it sounds good. But I have had necks where, from manufacturers where I play it, they're seated well, they play okay, but they don't sound well. And there is something to be said for gluing from that point. So it's not really one's wrong or right, you know, it's a matter of what you feel comfortable.
Now, do you put the glue in the slot before you hammer the fret in?
Okay.
Or after?
I do both, actually.
Yeah,
It
so
depends.
do I.
Yeah, it really depends. That's why it's so funny. The fretting, you know, this seminar, I could actually, if I went specifically, we could spend the whole entire weekend on fretting. But also just because of the fact that there's many different methods of doing that. I have actually taped off the fingerboard and put some glue in the slot, run it down, and put a fret in. The likelihood is the majority of times I'm using my neck jig, clamping the coil on here, turning it over, and injecting glue down the sides. They run down the slots, and I flip it over to the other side, do that the same way. I let it sit, and an hour and a half I'm taking
What are
it
your
off.
preferences?
Now that's with a sign acrylic glue, okay? If I'm doing either Type-On or any kind of aliphatic glue, that's fine, but you have to have time to wait. I actually have been experimenting. I asked a lot of guys about hide glue because I was looking for different hide glue. I like the idea that I can clean up hide glue right away. And there are different epoxies. One of the advantages to epoxies is that it really fills the whole entire slot. Okay, so transmission, I would say probably transmission of sound and tone is best with an epoxy that I've experimented with. But there's a lot of sometimes cleanup. You have to learn a method to be able to clean it up. Because, you know, the cleanup, I don't want to be there. After I love the board, scraping off the board, it's a tedious and hard thing to do. You can do it, but you have to find a method. I know a couple of guys, Mike Kuntz, Mark Weininger, those guys do amazing fretwork. And when I looked at their fretwork, they have methods where they do their guitars where there's virtually, the board is completely clean, and they're using a gluing method. You know, you have to reach out to guys and see how they do their, I mean, I'm always interested in how someone does their fretwork. I don't care if they just started or they've been 30 or better, and I want to see how it's done.
I think everybody probably has a least favorite guitar to work on. I want to ask you if you have any way of dealing with this, because it drives me crazy, and in fact, very recently, I had to refret an old Rickenbacker 4001. The friggin' truss rods. Of course, the only guitar in the world with an easily replaceable truss rod. They slide up, they slide in, and you can make them into a pretzel really easily.
Right.
I mean, it's so unpredictable. They've always been a headache, and this one particular bass just came closer to driving me insane than any fret job I've done since God knows when.
Right.
Have you ever found a way of dealing with those truss rods and being able to get a result out of the neck that you can predict?
Yeah, they're problematic. They have a lot of tendencies not to hold their own tension, you know, on string tension.
They get all bent
When
up.
somebody brings me in a Rickenbacker bass, I tell them right off the bat, this is a problem. They're like, what? Because you brought me a Rickenbacker. And I know people love Rickenbackers, you know, and that's a great thing. But some of their design is flawless. It's, I mean, completely flawed in the design of two rods. I understand the concept of trying to get a bass side and a treble side, but it's like overkill. One truss rod, if you think about it.
Especially when you need the truss rod boards.
Well, I've actually taken a person's Rickenbacker and I removed the fingerboard. It was so warped. We had to. It was an older vintage one. So he's like, I want to play the instrument. I don't care if it's value. So we removed the fingerboard. I removed the rods. I put a single rod. I filled the channels. I put a single rod in. That guy still plays 10 years now. He's been playing that instrument, and that neck doesn't move now. It hardly ever moves. But you know, that's to me an inherent design flaw with those Rickenbacker truss rods. The two double truss rods. I mean, I guess if you're playing a 6-string bass or something, you might have a need for that. But it's a single rod. If you you know, there's a matter of choice of correctly choosing the right wood. I prefer cortisone wood for necks. Otherwise laminate. You know, laminates work fine because laminate adds strength. But double rods, it's always a problem. And Rickenbacker, I would say 9 out of 10 Rickenbacker bases have that exact problem. 9 out of 10.
So have you found any sort of successful way of dealing with them?
Sometimes you can get new replacements and replace it and get the insert.
The stock.
Yeah. Tell them to get a different base. No, but it's hard to say. I mean, there is no easy method for that really, because the fact that it's a design flaw. I consider that a design flaw, an inherent design flaw that they have. Yeah.
Well, as far as vibration transmission, and we were talking earlier about the necks moving and settling. What about the use of carbon fiber?
Carbon fiber is great as far as the people who use that to reinforce the necks. I have had a couple of customers that have asked me to build them some Telecaster guitars, and we don't use truss rod at all. So not using a truss rod at all requires me to be very critical in selecting a good quarter-sawn piece of wood. And I think the one I built for this guy is about 1.5 years old. He plays it weekly out, and he's probably going to wear the frets out before I need to level that board.
Stupid question, can you use a truss rod with carbon fiber?
Yeah, sure. Plenty of guys do that. They use that, the carbon fiber is great. One of the guys over there, I think if you're not familiar, he sells the carbon fiber board, you know, pieces that will be able to inlay into the neck. They're great reinforcement. I mean, it does add some stability. The thing that would be more of a question is, what does it do for sound and tone?
Yeah, it raises the resonant frequency of the neck. That's the reason why I would use it.
Right. And it's exactly right. I did notice a difference in sound and tone when I tried experimenting with those.
Good, bad, or otherwise?
Yeah, I thought they were fine. I actually liked it. It actually added, you know, some sustain in a way that would resonate the whole instrument a little bit better. Stability, no doubt. You know, you could definitely do that. The biggest problem is when you have necks like these, where they're just so hollowed out because of the system that they use. It actually takes away a lot of the sound and tone. You know, I probably have like. People who have American standard necks that need refrets usually buy a new neck, or I prefer them to buy a new neck. I don't want to turn away work from the fret job, but I just know it's better for them, and they're going to enjoy their guitar better. You know, and they can even get another Fender neck. I have no problem with that.
Is that telling you maybe that the cortisone had no rod at all?
Yeah.
No carbon?
Nothing. I made this guy. He wanted a pure. He's like, I want a pure neck with nothing.
Why?
And just because he didn't even want to have anything that would disrupt that piece of wood and its vibration. His theory was, if I put a slot in there, there's going to be some sort of hollowness, even though you can fill the slot pretty well.
Yeah.
He just said, what if we used a great piece of quarter-sawn maple? He goes, I'm not looking for flames. I want a good piece of quarter-sawn maple, baseball bat size.
What was Fender thinking when they used flat saw?
It's the majority of the wood that they can get their hands on. Majority of, yeah, I mean, majority of the necks that you see that are manufactured by almost any company that have maple is going to be, because the majority of the wood is flat sawn. Think about it, when a manufacturer orders wood in large pallets, they use everything. You know, the difference between smaller builders and repairmen, you guys can go and actually select the wood, right? It's one of our favorite things. Look at that piece, you know, it's like, you know, you get there and you're like, I can't wait to pick up, look at this. I hope no one sees that one, you know, you're like, and you dig through the pile, and I love doing that, and that's one of my favorite things. So, but a manufacturer.
A number of people hate you.
Yeah, they hate it. Yeah, they hate when you come in, they're like, oh no, he's gonna send 3 pieces, you know, back, but, you know, and the people I get wood from that I get supplies from, they know that I need it to be at least at this quality level, or it's